Welcome to the 2025 Global Peace Film Festival Filmmaker Conversations. I'm Gabby Kennedy, host of the Actors Talk with Gabby Kennedy. And co-hosting these conversations with me is Nina Strike, our wonderful founder and festival director of the Global Peace Film Festival. This year's festival runs from September 16th through the 21st in Winter Park and Orlando. And also, the festival's Free for All Shorts program runs September 22nd through the 28th. For more information about our films, go to peacefilmfest.org. Now, I have the wonderful pleasure of introducing Samuel George, director of two films, Lithium Rising, The Race of Critical Minerals, and MOTOWN South, Organized Labor in the Battery Belt. Samuel, how are you today?
I'm doing wonderful, Gabby. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, all right, great. Samuel, will you please tell us about your films?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. First of all, I just want to say on behalf of Bertelsmann Foundation Documentaries, it's such an honor to be back at the Global Peace Film Festival. We've been able to participate a couple of times, and it's just such a cool fest because I think sort of like we see it, it's really films with a purpose. I mean, I think everyone makes a film with a purpose, but sort of this broader kind of social forwarding a social conversation. I think there's a lot of overlap. So kudos to Nina, who's been a wonderful voice of feedback and conversation with Bertelsmann Foundation Documentaries for a while now. So I appreciate the chance to say that. And as you mentioned, we have two films in the festival this year, and they're born out of the same effort. And that was this long-term investigation we did into the impact of lithium batteries. Now, and I certainly didn't realize this when I started this project, just how pervasive lithium batteries are in our everyday life. If you're watching this on a computer, if you're watching this on a phone, that's lithium battery. If you're getting an EV, that's a lithium battery. Probably when you're brushing your teeth, when you're using a camera, weed whacker. So much of our lives now is run on lithium batteries. And if you're out there or anything like me before I did this project, you have no idea where this stuff comes from. I think that I certainly didn't know where it comes from.
Yeah.
And that's what this effort is about, because all those batteries rely on critical minerals, which are substances that are found in different parts of the world that are required to make these rechargeable batteries. We call them a lithium battery or a lithium ion battery, and certainly lithium is very important. But it's also not just lithium. If you're watching this on a screen or a phone, you also have some cobalt in there, you have some nickel in there, and then again, as I mentioned, you have lithium in there. Now, where does that stuff come from? And who controls the supply chain? And how does the mining of these things impact people on the ground? I think a lot of us might want to try out an electric vehicle because we say, hey, this is going to be better for the environment. And maybe in the long run it will be. But there are really, really important dilemmas, moral dilemmas involved in this that I think it's vital that we understand. And that's what both of these films really try to do, is investigate that process and try to just bring those dilemmas to light and give you both sides of it. Now, I don't want to just keep talking, but I think the fundamental way to think about, especially the feature-length film, which is Lithium Rising, is we look at it from two levels. On the one hand, there's this geopolitical fight to control these minerals. That means the great powers of the world realize that we need this stuff, and they're trying to, jostle each other to have access to those different critical minerals. And if we're being honest, it is a competition that right now is being won by China, and being won by a lot. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe it is a bad thing, but for a lot of people in Washington, D.C., policymakers in Europe, that's a complication, and they want to close that gap. So on the one hand, we're looking at these big, I think of it as like the elephant stomping, these major global powers fighting for control. And the other thing the film looks at is when those elephants are stomping, where are their feet landing? And that's a lot of times poor communities, indigenous communities, be it in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in the United States. that's where these minerals are. And a lot of times they're paying the price for the mining without necessarily getting the reward. So that's sort of a long answer to the question there.
And then the interesting thing about the two films together is that that MOTOWN South gives a perspective from on the ground in the United States, in the South, of labor fighting back. So on the one hand, the overview in Lithium Rising, the global overview that you provide, is actually hard to look at the indigenous and poorer communities around the world that are affected by the rare earth minerals mining. And here with MOTOWN South, you have basically a beginning of a labor uprising. And so that's why we felt that the two films went together so well to put the program together. Can you address that and also possibly what you found that wasn't able to go into the film in the same respect in the community, in the different communities around the world that you shot the film in?
Yeah, and Nina, I'm so appreciative of that question, because that was originally the way the MOTOWN South was initially supposed to be part of the Lithium Rising documentary. And one of the great things about it is, just as you said, we meet a number of communities that seem like they haven't found their voice or haven't found their agency, or are basically being pushed around by big global companies. In the case of MOTOWN South, you're right. There you're kind of showing efforts to unionize. Now, it was just Lithium Rising was such a complicated documentary, and the MOTOWN South element was such a complicated and important story that we just didn't feel we had to spin it out, because MOTOWN South is about 25 minutes long, and we couldn't fit that much in to Lithium Rising, and we didn't want to cut it down any further. But we've got a really strong response to that film, so I'm glad that we did spin it out and make it its own thing. And I can give you a sentence, you kind of alluded to it, but how does this MOTOWN South fit into the discussion of critical minerals? Well, there's various stages of critical minerals, and when you get towards the end, you're making a battery and you're putting it in an electric vehicle, okay? Now, there's been this major effort in the United States to say, hey, let's do more of that here in the U.S., because otherwise you're relying on China. Right now, China and the United States don't seem to be getting along so well. At any moment, it could fall apart. They say, we need to make this stuff here. And there's been a lot of effort to do that. But here's the interesting part. Where are these major factories opening up shop? Well, it's in the American South, places like Georgia, Alabama. Down there's a whole lot of EV stuff coming online. And you might say to yourself, as we said to ourselves, well, why is that? And the reason is, one of the reasons, and I think actually both sides admit this, the companies admit this as well, is there's less of a tradition and history of unions in the South. So you often get better conditions. If you're purchasing labor, you get better conditions in the South. And so the companies have noticed that, but then slowly the laborers are picking up on that too. And there's been a series of new organizing efforts in the South. And so that's really a groundbreaking story, because it's sort of the future of organized labor. It's the future of the green energy kind of movement colliding. And there's no guarantee on how this will work out. Already in some cases in the South, we've seen examples where the fight to unionize has been successful. And one of those stories is featured in MOTOWN South, the story of the Bluebird Bus Company. But there are other examples where it's been unsuccessful. So it's really an ongoing situation, but it's a fascinating dynamic of new opportunity, which we're so thankful for in the United States. Think of almost all the times we talk about the United States, we talk about production jobs leaving. Well, this is an example of production jobs coming back, but there's real concerns about the conditions of workers that are not protected by unions. So it's a really complex and interesting story, and I'm really thankful for the chance to screen both of them together, because that's originally how this was conceived of. It was part of the research for Lithium Rising, the work on MOTOWN South.
So Lithium Rising is, I mean, first of all, the most global film that you've made, and also the most complex. Can you talk about your approach to putting it together, and how you basically went into it, and and what surprised you along the way, whether you came out with something sort of like what you were expecting, or if it came out as something completely different?
Yes, thank you for. I mean, it's the most ambitious project I've ever done, and really by far, because we're on 5 different continents, and I'd always wanted to do a project like that, and so to have the opportunity to do something like that was really something I've always wanted to do, but it presents real challenges. So if you think of a documentary, right, documentaries that we love, you kind of soak in with somebody or someplace. I'm trying to think of other. For example, I've shown a film at Global Peace Film Festival with people trying to get out the vote in Baltimore. And you just stick with them through the ups and downs of the documentary. But if you're jumping now to a new continent every 10 minutes, as we do in Lithium Rising, that's a real challenge to build continuity, because it's not going to be around the same people. So my challenge as a director is to make you care about situations and people over and over again. So in some ways, it's sort of like going to a restaurant and getting a bunch of appetizers. Every section's a little bit different. And so my challenge was to take this disparate story and weave it together into one comprehensive documentary that wasn't repetitive, which is really a dangerous thing, because in many places around the world, the challenges are similar. So how do you push that story along and have the different sections add up to more than the sum of its parts? And, I hope that we've been successful there. It definitely was a challenge. I think that what I did learn making it is just how pervasive this story is around the world, and how incredibly important it is in so many different places, that either you're looking to a country, any given country on earth either has critical minerals, needs access to critical minerals, or both. So that's something that I learned. I learned other things as well. So for example, there's a key process. It's sort of like oil, in that you can't just take oil out of the ground and put it in your car. It has to be refined. Well, critical minerals have to be refined too. And that's the area where China is really, really, really dominating. Now, why is that? In part, that's because it's a very environmentally dirty process. And a lot of the quote unquote West, the United States, Europe, they say, well, we don't want to do that here. Send it over somewhere else to do it. And that's why China was able to build up such a big lead. And then you bump into one of these moral dilemmas then. Well, do we really want more refining here? Because what's that going to do to local environments? You're certainly going to get pushback. We're already seeing that in countries such as Serbia. There was issues like that in Nevada. So I think everywhere we went, we found these really intense moral questions. And what I tried to do as a filmmaker there was give both sides the chance to make their best story, to give their best argument. So I think a great example of that is in Thacker Pass in Nevada. That's a major lithium mine that they're building out there, and they're building it right next to an indigenous reservation. And Thacker Pass has really divided the tribe. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. There's some members that are in favor of it. They say this is a chance for job opportunity. It's going to, in a place where there's no jobs otherwise, it's going to bring in money. It's going to bring in this and that. And then there's other people that saying this is an major environmental concern. And that once again, it's just people coming in to take from the land and leave very little here. And so my goal with it wasn't to say, well, you're right and you're wrong. It was rather to give both groups the chance to make their best argument. And so that the viewer can walk away and say, all right, now when I pick up my phone, I know what's in this. And I can start to have my own beliefs on who I think is right and wrong.
So before I turn it back over to Gabby, as you know, the Global Peace Film Festival, we want people to basically do things about what they've seen and, take away something that they can integrate into their own lives. What do you want people to do because they've seen this film?
That's one of the hardest questions, and I get asked that question frequently, and it's difficult because I don't want to be a hypocrite. I can't put my phone down. I'm like the rest of us. I'm addicted to it. Sometimes we show this film, and it's not uncommon that someone in the audience gets up and makes the point that we need to cut ourselves off from all of this stuff. And maybe if you wanted to change things, that would be the best plan. But I don't see that happening. I can't say that I'm doing it by a long shot. So in that sense, I think it's a little bit of a cop-out that filmmakers sometimes can do, to say, hey, we're just exposing the problem. And I think the film does a good job of that. I think it helps show you the major concerns here. What can we do about it? Well, the film kind of ends on this hopeful note. And that's this idea that these minerals, and this is crazy, the minerals can be recycled. And when they're recycled, they don't degrade. And that's kind of wild to think about, because any of us that have owned an iPhone know that after 2 years, the battery starts to be terrible, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. But whatever's degrading in there isn't the minerals. So there's ways you can get them back. And the idea is, okay, maybe then we don't have to go dig them around from other countries and cause these environmental concerns. They're in another moral dilemma, right? That's a very important source of jobs for these other countries. So everywhere you go, it's trade-offs. But I think that there's a number of ideas out there. I think when you look at diamonds, for example, there's this whole idea of a passport that tells you where your diamond is from, where it was sourced, to ensure that it's not a conflict diamond. And there's a lot of talk of doing something similar with these critical minerals, but we're a long way away from that, from anything like that happening. And I think it would take consumer pressure for that to happen. I don't think the companies feel the need to do that on their own. So I think if people were more aware of it and asked the right questions, that's an important start.
That's really good, Samuel. While creating these films, or while in the process of bringing this story to life, have you received any pushback from the people who are for this industry? Tell me a little about that.
That's an interesting question. I think that not even necessarily pushback, but lack of access. So the Chinese, for example, will not engage. So when we film in Indonesia, we're not going inside the factory. Rather, we're outside the factory and talking to local communities about how this is impacting you. In other cases, the companies were very welcoming to us. In Chile, we got to go into the SQM lithium fields where they're evaporating creating the lithium mineral. We got to visit in Nevada. We got to go inside the site there. And I think that, because this is not meant to be a negative, we've been able to get into certain places, because I don't think the idea is to somehow say that these minerals are terrible. It's more just that there's this major thing happening that so much of us don't know about.
Yeah, that's really good. Can you share with me just sort of one of the behind the scenes moments while doing this research, like maybe one of the stories that's included in your film, Lithium Rising? Share with us a little bit about one of the stories that impact you the most.
Yeah, well, first of all, a wonderful thing about this is that it's in so many of the most beautiful places in the world. So to get to go to the salt flats of Bolivia, people will spend a lot of money to go there for tourism, and I got to go there with a purpose to kind of meet the local communities. And so when you're up there, way, way, way above sea level in the Andes, and you go to these tiny little villages that you would otherwise never get to go to, and you meet people and start kicking around a soccer ball, that really is a special feeling. And we got to do that. And even some of that kicking of the soccer ball ended up making it into the film. We got to go to the historic silver mine of Potosi, where they've been pulling out silver since the 16th century. And, they say maybe millions of people have died there. If you've studied Latin America, it's a major topic. And to get to see it with my own eyes and even go into the mine, which I actually found very scary. I went into the mine, and it was, it caught up with me pretty quick, and I thought I was going to be a tough guy because I went in with a guy that was helping me, and I was trying to film while going through this tiny little mine, and I very quickly was like, that's not happening. So I kind of tapped this other guy and just, without any words, just handed him the camera, and I kept going in, but I was like, I can't do this, because I was also about twice as tall as everybody else there, just ramming my head. Luckily, I had a helmet on. But you get to see the kind of reality that people were living there. And whenever somebody's welcoming to you and shows you that and shares their life, it's just an incredible privilege. And the only hope is that you can give an honest representation and make it worth their while. So I'm extremely thankful to all the people that were open to talk for this. But I think the most memorable for me was definitely Bolivia was incredible. I also thought this northern Nevada, which again is not a tourist area at all, it's just below the Oregon border, was just stunningly beautiful. Stunningly beautiful part of the United States that I would have never otherwise gone to. I mean, there's just hardly anything there, but it's in a very rugged way, extremely beautiful. And I'm very thankful for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To see the world like that and experience it like that it's a real blessing, and it opens your life up.
Yeah,
So Samuel, my last question for you is, what's next for you as a director? If you can discuss it with us.
Sure, absolutely. So I think one thing we're doing that I'm very excited about, especially in this era where a lot of times people don't have the time to sit down and watch an hour-long film. But one thing I should say is we're working, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we're working on a license that's going to eventually have the film get syndicated on PBS. So hopefully that comes through. So that'd be a great way to get the film out there. If anybody wants to see our films, you can find them on bfnadocs.org. They're always free, and these ones will eventually be there as well. But one thing we're doing is going back and saying all this footage that didn't make it into the Lithium Rising documentary, say the story in Potosi, it's in there, but it's not in there for as long as we had footage for, because we had to be tight. We're making shorter documentaries about each location that allows us to dive deeper into specific locations. So we're going to start releasing those as well. And those are coming together really nicely. And I'm just so happy that that footage isn't dying on a hard drive somewhere buried in my desk, that we're getting some of that extra stuff out there. And then I'm working on a documentary about the impact of climate change and land loss in southern Louisiana. So I've been spending time with fishermen and people, shrimpers down on the bayou. And that's been a very different project, because whereas, these ones we're jumping around the world. I mean, this is really one of those documentaries where we're trying to just soak in with different people and understand a way of life that's at risk. So I hope to finish filming that this year and then have something ready for early next year.
Nice. Samuel, where can I just immediately want to call you Sam?
Everybody calls me Sam. I just
yes.
Sam.
I call him Sam.
Sam, yes. Samuel, where can we connect with you and find out more about your work?
Yeah, well, the number one thing that I would recommend is our website, which, like I say, bfnadocs.org. That has our whole collection of documentary films, and they're all online and they're all for free. And then if you want to connect with me personally, you can just go to the Bertelsmann Foundation website. So I do my work for the Bertelsmann Foundation. It's a nonprofit educational organization, and you can feel free to reach out with me. I'm happy to connect and talk about the films and anything anybody might like.
Okay. All right. Well, Samuel, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss your films. I myself really hope that I get to take a look at your films and more of your work. I'll connect with you on the websites that you just mentioned. So for our viewers, again, the Global Peace Film Festival is happening September 16th through the 21st in Orlando and Winter Park, Florida. Samuel, we all hope to see you there. And Nina, thank you again for putting together this wonderful festival. So we'll say bye for now, and we'll see you in a few days. All right, bye, guys.